I guess we are a divided country. I heard some of the comments from the other side of the aisle. I don't know if they show up, some of the people I hang around with, they say signs of America's greatness are its universities and its COVID response. I'll tell you, there's a whole nother world out there that does not feel that our universities are right now what they should be. And I think the COVID response is good. And as far as helping the middle class, I think the difficulty in buying a house or buying a car today are about the toughest I can remember in my lifetime. It really threatens the middle class. But I'll ask a question to him. We'll talk to Mr. Portman. When I look at the problems we have, first of all, I agree with Mr. Yarmouth. On Social Security, we should begin to look at the general fund. I kind of look at the budget as a whole. As far as the people saying, I think Social Security is the one thing we can't cut because we've made certain promises to the American people. I know there's some politicians who like to brag, look at me, I'm so tough, I'm gonna cut Social Security. I think it's the one thing we can't cut. What I'm gonna ask you, whether in your experience here, people have all talked about getting back to our Constitution. And I realize it might be a relatively small overall percent of our budget, some of the programs, but when I look at all the people around here who think it's the federal government's to deal with housing or the federal government's responsibility to deal with education or income transfer payments or commerce, it just drives me up a wall because, of course, our forefathers never would have guessed to this degree we get involved in these things. In any of the things that you've been involved with, have you looked what the deficit would be if we just transferred all this stuff back to the states and said, look at constituents, these may be good programs, they may not be, but we are broke, and you should talk to your state legislature about them and see where we'd wind up if we took all these programs and just said, here, states, you decide whether you want to raise the revenue for them.
Well, first, thanks for your good question. You saw in my testimony, I talked about looking at the role of the federal government, and that's for the reason you just stated. It's grown dramatically, as you know, over time, and to the point that our spending as a country has gone from when I last testified before this committee, which was about 16 years ago, to today. We're spending $2.6 trillion, then we're spending about $6.3 trillion now.
Right. Do you think the American public is persuadable that there's certain things that are state and local, the federal government's got to get rid of, and we balance the budget that way?
Well, I think there are, but we have to remind ourselves that although we ought to do that, and I said that in my testimony and I believe it, about 70% of the spending today is on autopilot. And so it's not part of that 30%. Now that includes interest on the debt, but significantly, as was said earlier.
Oh, some of that autopilot was unconstitutional too, but go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, but we just have to realize that we're not going to solve the problem there, but it's a big part of what I think any commission ought to do is do a top-to-bottom review of everything and look at what the federal role is. And in some cases, the states should take a bigger responsibility. And I think, you know, you look historically, that's been the case. I will also say, in terms of your comment on interest rates, you're absolutely right. And it's not just a coincidence. I mean, look at what Fitch and Moody have said. Fitch has already downgraded our debt. Moody has threatened to do so. And that raises long-term rates to the point that, as you indicate, we now have constituents, you have constituents who are paying 8% on their mortgage, and their car payments are out of control. So this is directly related to this problem. Both Fitch and Moody's, by the way, said that dysfunction in Washington and the fiscal crisis, the fiscal impending crisis, is what influenced them to say, I'm not sure this American debt, you know, ought to get a high rating anymore. So it directly relates to interest rates and therefore to your constituents and others who are suffering in this economy because of high inflation and high interest rates.
Thank you.